Whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Randall Forte. I'm the Executive Director for the Lehigh Valley Arts Council. I'd like to welcome you and thank you for coming today. We're all connected by a pandemic that created great uncertainty and isolation, but now the emergence of a vaccine is focusing our attention on reopening the arts. One way to tackle the safety issues is to learn how other communities are working together to share information and best practices. How are the arts and cultural organizations addressing safe reopenings for their visitors, families, and friends and staff? We are grateful to André Solomon and the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council for their work and willingness to share findings from their Pittsburgh constituents, as well as the research they have garnered from their participation in the WolfBrown's COVID-19 Audience Outlook Monitor survey. This monitor is a longitudinal survey specifically for arts organizations to secure information from their audiences on their opinions about reopening, re-engaging with arts organizations, health and safety issues, engagement in online and virtual programming, attitudes about future attendance, and much more. We are very pleased to have André here, Program Coordinator for Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council. Excuse me about that. Originally from Massachusetts, he is now in Pittsburgh by way of Syracuse University, where he received a Bachelor's of Arts in flute. He earned a Master's of Arts Administration, Arts Management from Carnegie Mellon University, concentrating on community engagement. He hopes to utilize both of his degrees to enforce social justice for the arts, a belief that the arts are not frivolous, but a necessary component of human development. As a minority in the arts world, both as an artist and arts manager, he desires to provide opportunities for people of color to visualize representation, therefore ownership to actualize their dreams. At the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council, André works with COVID working groups, development, and diversity, equity, access, and inclusion. A couple of housekeeping rules. The meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the Lehigh Valley Arts Council website shortly after the meeting. Also, today's presentation is being closed captioned. You can turn on closed captioning by selecting the CC button on your Zoom controls at the bottom of your screen. And if you have any questions for André, please send them in the chat and they will be read at the end of the presentation. André, welcome. Thank you for being here, and I turn this over to you.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. Just give me 1 second to share. All right, can everyone see this? Cool. All righty. All right, so GPAC was able to work with WolfBrown and to work on a survey, which is called the Audience Outlook Monitor. Basically, as Randall kind of already gave a little synopsis, it's a survey that is actually national. It involves 500 plus arts and cultural organizations worldwide. There's even some spots in other countries. Basically, it's an effort to make sure that organizations in Pittsburgh and other cities are making smart decisions on how to move forward during COVID. Also helps design key trends, which can help with messaging, communications, working with groups, etc. And then so all participating organizations send emails to their constituents every month or bi-monthly, depending on their size. And then they get, in return, they get all of that information back in a database. So here are some of the organizations in Pittsburgh that have been participating with us, 23. It ranges from dance, music, theater, the Children's Museum, etc. And we're really lucky to have them and their resources. And so in this community learning session, we're going to look at the trends and the types of arts and cultural experiences audiences currently are and are not participating in, trends in risk tolerance and future expectations for re-engagement in the arts, demand for digital versus live programming, programming expectations post-pandemic, current expectations for health and safety measures for facilities and audiences, and revenue opportunities. So as you can see at the bottom, we have deployed 3 So COVID has been a weird landscape for us all. So we are supposed to actually be done before the end of the year in our 5 waves, but from the election to allowing organizations to complete end of year giving, we kind of moved around our deployments. So in the first one in September, we had 1,600 people participate. In October, 1,900, and then towards the end, to avoid the election, we had 15. We skipped December again to allow organizations to do their year-end giving, holidays, etc. And we resumed in January, where we had our 4th wave on January 6th. And the results actually came in. So I'm sorry I don't have those numbers on hand. So first, we're just going to talk about context and demographics. So for the people who have taken the survey, we have what is gender identity. So we have 67% women, 33% men, and a little smidgen of 1 for non-binary. In terms of age, as you can see, the most dominating one is the higher level, 65, 74, going down to the 55 to 64. So the average age of participants who were taking these surveys was 57. Also, in terms of race and ethnicity, 94% of people were white, and then a less percentages with other races. So kind of stopping here, full transparency and stop. A little bit of, what we're seeing in survey data and just people who are kind of participating is, again, it's the majority populations. And so what GPAC is kind of asking ourselves in the community, and also what we hope other people are doing in the arts, is how do we get more people who are from minority, who may not always be receptive or given the access to participate in these kind of things? What is the strategy to get more involvement from people who aren't always seen and heard? So again, COVID has had a personal impact on people. And so we had 50% of people who were living with someone who is vulnerable to COVID-19. We had 30% of people who lost income because of the pandemic, and then 20% who have been tested for COVID-19. But this is a little dated, but in some recent waves, actually people have been getting tested more, which is good, probably because of holidays and etc. And just make people probably believing a little bit more in the testing. So out of the people who had that household risk, we had 80% have pre-existing health conditions, 73% of age, and then 21% sensitive individuals who they were caring for, and then 3% other. For example, we have people who have pregnancy, immune compromises, cancer, lack of compliance, so just, not following, so kind of being in that risk, and then career, for example, all the people who are in hospitals, care facilities, etc. So in terms of the financial hardship, we had 67% of the people who took the survey who filed for unemployment benefits, which kind of proposes a curiosity that most of these people who fell into this category were probably art practitioners, artists, etc., who have been affected, or maybe in other fields as well. And then we had people who had difficulty paying rent or mortgages at 15%, and 25%, again, kind of taking care of someone, which, again, provided some financial harm, and then the 15% of other. Again, examples of financial hardship: loss of revenue, job stability, loss of healthcare, mental health issues, and child cares. But again, looking back at who was taking the surveys, with about the average age being 57 and up, many people actually claimed in the written parts of this survey that they were retired. So actually not claiming very little hardship at all. So looking at 2020, thinking about, the people who are taking the survey and what they're doing in terms of engagement with cultural events, we have the biggest percentages with galleries and then stage plays. So, and then also musical theater, which wraps into theater as well. And so at least what I have been seeing in the trends is that, of course, museums, because that personal, the people, you can kind of remove that from the equation and allow people to look at things that don't have COVID or wouldn't be a risk. And then in terms of plays and theater, a lot of theater organizations have been doing a really good job to still put on performances digitally for the public. Whereas unfortunately, a lot of things like music and dance are facing the most hardship because it is so, one, the aerosols, and then being so close to individuals during performances. So we'll look at current conditions. And so this is just a little segment looking with people's comfort with public activities. So basically, for the most part, people are somewhat comfortable with public activities right now. As we're seeing in the public, a lot of people are still in favor and supporting the local restaurants, as we should. But people are still comfortable, as you can see, going into restaurants, participating inside and outside. As you can see, all the heaters outside on the streets, people still want to make sure that they're eating. However, there was a little increase on people who were those who weren't comfortable. So it went up from 54% to 49% compared to the last survey developments. And then again, things like movies, gyms, flying, 60 to 75% of people are just not comfortable with that, including myself, as I went home in the holidays in a rental car to avoid the flights. So looking at organization communications, again, this is just feedback on how organizations are keeping in touch with their audiences. However, this was only included in the September deployment. So overall, people really do believe that organizations are doing a really good job communicating, at the right frequency, the amount, what's the important crucial information on what they're doing. However, a lot of people are not tuning into the digital broadcast or their digital content. As you can see, up to 14% of people actually weren't aware, which could be a whole conglomeration of Zoom fatigue, missing the in-person experience, and again, just being overwhelmed with so much digital that finding these things is like a sea where you can't find anything. But at least audiences feel that organizations are doing a good job communicating. So as you can see with this little graph, and it is pretty consistent from the three waves, is that about 60, 69, 63, 65% of people are not tuning into the digital content. Again, we have a little bit of the people on the orange who are not aware, the green, which is yes, and then maybe some people who just tuned in once. So moving forward, we have the demand for live programming. Basically just the confidence level and people going out again under different circumstances. So basically audiences really do want to come back. We have a lot of people, 76% of people said that they would come back, and 15% said that they would come even more once the pandemic is over. So though people are not tuning into the digital content, people are still being loyal and faithful and still wanting to return to the organizations once it is safe. And even in fact, people are still purchasing short and long-term tickets. A little fewer, but people are still doing justice and making sure that the organizations are getting revenue and people are seeing their content. One big thing though, which is not surprising, is that a lot of audiences do not want to hear about COVID stories when they're trying to make an escape with the arts. So if you are planning things for the future, try to make sure that it avoids COVID topics for now, since people don't really want to be having that on their mind 24/7. So then we go to the organizational health and safety. And again, this is just the steps to reduce health that organizations can do and audiences would like. So basically, as probably, straightforward, that any safety precaution is going to make audiences feel better about themselves and their return. So again, the things that really helped people feel a little bit more comfortable that organizations were taking a stride in was updating the ventilation systems. It has actually been a really big conversation with a lot of museums. it's Merv, and I don't know the specific names, but I know Merv is one of them, updating from like an 8 to a 14, which is also good, of course, for health, but a lot of organizations, especially if it's small, it's a big increase in financial strain and increase in financial hardship. So it becomes a problem of how do you become safe, but also how do you afford it? And if you can't afford the health and safety right now, a lot of audiences might detract from you because, again, people want to be safe during this time. Moving forward, again, just disinfecting. A lot of museums have been doing a lot of campaigns and ads just to make sure that people know that they're cleaning. And then again, the use of face masks. A lot of, again, I keep referencing museums, but they're one of the most organizations who have been doing, you know, regular programming during this time, but at least there has been no issues of people turning down face masks. Again, as we've seen, a lot of audiences just want to come back. So I guess whatever you want to do to feel safe, that they're going to follow the rules. So there hasn't been any complications, at least in Pittsburgh, of people refusing to wear face masks or to challenge any systems. However, there is 10% of audiences that will not return with a face mask. So out of the 94% of these 10, people will not return with a face mask due to others not abiding to the rules or not feeling safe regardless. As you can see, it seems that individuals are kind of deciding upon themselves what is right instead of trusting public officials. And so what we have found out in the survey, especially with the written components, is that just people do not trust each other. Sad news, but also just being full transparent with everyone here is that in the end of the day, you probably know your circle of being safe, but when it comes to integrating with the public, you never know where people are, how they're following the rules. So I think it, again, kind of creates a little bit of unbalance on people's feeling settled in a space with other people. And so as you can see, we have a graph showing what conditions will people return to arts and cultural events. The biggest one being, let me move this little thing, being vaccinated or the developed immunity, which again, it seems that a lot of people are going to come back once the vaccine is out, which is good news, at least in 2021. I personally have some friends working in nursing and healthcare that have gotten their vaccinations. So I think as we go into the year and hopefully with successful deployment of vaccinations, more and more people will be responsive to coming back because now there is some immunity to the COVID virus. And then looking at some other top ones, yellow, there's some people again who are just going to come anyway. So once it's legally allowed, they'll be back. Again, rates of infections dropping kind of, but for the most part, a lot of people will be coming back once there is vaccinations for themselves and the public. So we go to organizational specific demand. So again, this is just explaining demand for specific organization programs, as well as contextual questions about previous attendance. So this is a very short one, but for the most part, 94% of arts audiences are somewhat eager or very eager to return. And as we talked about, people kind of dictating what they would like to deem is coming back or safe or what is the right thing to do. Luckily, those people do trust themselves, but also the arts organizations to make these kind of statements compared to the public, which then kind of puts into question is what is people's trust levels with government and public standards and within cities, etc. So, but it's hopeful that at least the audiences do trust us and have put faith in us going forward. Very short, but for the most part, the one thing that we saw is in September, we had the best data. And then as we were going into October, those two waves, we saw the consistency, which is good, but it kind of led us to, again, make the moves of taking that December off. And now as we go into the new year, we're doing January, and then we're going to skip February and do March. And then actually we're thinking of extending the survey actually into the next, this coming December, just to see how organizations will be while the vaccine is being put out in place. One big thing that we're trying to push in Pittsburgh is actually to make organizations use their unused spaces as places for vaccine to distribute the vaccine. Hopefully that wasn't too quick. Hopefully that was something, but I'm here to answer questions and you have all my time. So I am here for you guys.
You answered the question I had about arts venues serving as vaccination sites. That would be a great idea, especially since the trust level would probably raise quite significantly. I wanted to ask you, do you want to take questions on what you just presented, or do you want to use a little time to address this issue of standards of excellence for safety?
I'm very open in term. I guess I'll just go with the standards of excellence. As we saw in the data, is that a lot of people are, expecting organizations to be like top tier in terms of health and safety, but also because this pandemic is not just a singular pandemic, is another one in terms of racial injustice, is that a lot of individuals and audiences are also having an expectation that organizations are going to change their mindset in a progressive way to make sure that everyone moving forward is feeling welcomed and accepted in spaces. So it's a little bit of both the values and morals of organizations and then also what they're actually doing for health and safety. But again, as we saw in the data, there is a big group of people who just want to be told that they can go to an arts organization and that will be fine. And that's kind of that check for them to come back. But a lot of, because this is an aerosol kind of, airborne disease virus, that a lot of arts leaders have been talking about changing the ventilation systems, because if they're old or outdated or cannot filtrate enough, then it's not safe for people to be in a space where all the air is going to be shared simultaneously. Yeah, and then I would say one of the other biggest thing is just communication in terms of, the moment you step into an arts organization, from the moment you get out, making sure that there are staples of, hey, wash your hands, hey, this is where you're wearing a mask. Just kind of everywhere to make sure that audiences and people participating are being checked up, but also just staff, because we have to make sure that we as arts leaders are following the rules just the same as the people coming into our spaces.
Mitch talked about a statewide group of arts councils and arts organizations working together to establish a standard of excellence throughout the state and the Commonwealth, so that Pennsylvania would be considered, one of the safest states in which to engage with the arts. Is that something that is happening down the road more?
Yeah.
How soon would something like that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping, as soon as possible. I know that with a lot of the working groups in the different disciplines, from museums to performing arts to arts education, we've been talking about this kind of social compact, because, unfortunately, the inequalities compared to large organizations, small organizations, independent artists, etc. We really need to, as we move into a space where we can go back to in-person, or again, a more hybrid with a vaccine going out, we need to make sure that we're all on a united front. Because we need to make sure that we're all following the rules, because if there is organizations that are kind of going to go rogue, or if there are in organizations that need support, we need to make sure that we have kind of these collective rules moving forward. So for example, if this MERV 8 is, or MERV 14 is the standard for a ventilation system, if that is in our social compact and there's an organization that can't, then we have to find ways to make sure that we're bolstering and supporting them. In terms of this the PA kind of councils, making sure that they are coming united, a kind of continuation of this social compact where we have these strict rules and guidelines, not just to, you know, show the public that we are kind of becoming united and we're all going to be clean and we're going to be safe and we're going to be progressive institutions, but also just to keep us in check and accountability. Because at least what I have been learning in all of this is that we all are siloed at times and we don't always come together. And so creating any and more united fronts for us to collaborate is probably, in my personal opinion, the best way to move forward, especially as we're seeing in COVID, a lot of small organizations just unfortunately going to a demise or closing because they didn't have the support systems in place or didn't have the collaborative ties for other organizations to help them out. I know one big thing is money, which we all want, but finding ways of how can we help each other during crisis, because if it's not COVID, it could be something else, and just being prepared to help each other out in the process.
Andre, I do have one question in the chat.
Yeah.
And while I read that out, if anyone after this would like to message a question in the chat, I can read it out, or if you're not feeling shy, you're welcome to unmute your mic and go ahead and ask a question, but I'll read this one off to start. So since you have shared this information with the Pittsburgh area and Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council has had access to it, have you seen any response either within your organization or in the community in terms of services offered, programming, etc.?
Yeah, that's a good question. So actually with a lot of the data, one of our big things at the council is doing communications. We're calling it Restart the Arts. And so what we're doing is we're giving the raw data, which isn't associated to any organization just for privacy, to give that to a media company where they'll actually, for example, that one little piece about, you know, people not trusting public or government, like how can we put that out as a PSA to make people more, hey, these are these resources you can tap into that are from the public, etc. Again, the one big thing that I've been looking to in terms of demographics is like, how do we get more BIPOC individuals in the space? A lot of the museums actually have been using the data to create diversity, equity, accessibility, inclusion, I would say team, where we're actually doing trainings to make sure that arts leaders know how to engage with these people, because a lot of times that I have seen is the problem is that we are seeing that, you know, why aren't they coming? We're doing some programs, etc. But we actually have to make a change, whereas we have to come to them. And so with the data being shown that 93% of it being white dominated, what can we do to change that so that people actually have the tools, the resources? Maybe if that's the problem, then how do we actually get communication channels to these groups? A lot of the stakeholders within these organizations, audience lists, though expansive, are very limited, because a lot of people who want to take a survey, sometimes, again, not making their voices feeling heard. In terms of, again, kind of what we're seeing with the vaccine and these again, the spaces of how can we, as arts institutions, because our audiences actually trust us more than government, what can we personally do to spread awareness about COVID? But again, thinking about what I said previously is how can we use our unused spaces as vaccination destinations for people? Because what we're seeing is that there's a lot of vaccines being held, but they're not being distributed, one, because of capacity, people, spaces. And so a big initiative that WolfBrown is trying to do with all the organizations being included is to have them be spaces where people can get the vaccine. still in the works, but a lot of it is more geared to communications, and how are we getting people who aren't seen in the survey, heard. One little thing that I thought about is, because age is so low too, what are ways that we can actually tap into younger audiences? Do we need to create a arts education program? Do we need to have focus groups? It might be more work on our end in terms of that. And that's one idea that Kristen Wishon, our communication specialist at GPAC, was talking about, is if we need to figure out more deeper data because it's not being given to us, then we might have to create these auxiliary focus groups to figure out what they want. Because as you've seen in Who's Taking It, there's a big chunk of people who are not being, so we're only getting a little sliver of what our whole Pittsburgh audience wants and feels comfortable with. I don't know if that answers, I also rambled, but there's a lot of avenues, but it's more communications and people driven. And then health and safety, especially with the ventilation systems.
I do have two more questions, actually. This one is from myself. So I saw that Pittsburgh Arts Council is starting up something called the Audience Safety Fund, which I'm sure you can speak more towards, but is that something that programmatically came about because of the information you received in this study, with audience members wanting there to be PPE available from arts organizations, or was this something separate from the study? It seems like a great program, so just curious about it.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a correlation, but actually more so what kind of sparked this was, once COVID happened, we had the emergency fund for artists, where we raised a bunch of money to give out to the artists in Pittsburgh, and then kind of thinking it was a little bit of a tie with end of year giving, because instead of really getting money for us, we wanted to kind of channel in a way as, what can we do for organizations to get the necessary money and resources for them to open back up? Again, a lot of small organizations are struggling, so this was kind of an effort to support them compared to an end of year campaign where it's about us.
And then one other question I had was, are there either through GPAC or in your community collaborative marketing opportunities that are available?
Yeah, so I'm saying yes, because I know Kristen Wishon, again, our communications person, is always open to talking and collaborating. We share a lot of information on the daily with our social media channels, etc. But I would definitely, and I'm willing to share a contact, of course, or she's on our website. We're, again, with that kind of Restart the Arts campaign that we're doing, we're, again, making sure that arts organizations are getting that communication out there. So basically, we raised all this money that we got from the R.K. Mellon Foundation. And again, making sure that it's not about GPAC. We wanted to take all that money, give it to media sponsors, different kind of ad agencies, and kind of give them the money to collaborate with organizations in Pittsburgh to get their messaging across. Because as with the vaccine coming out, it seems that like fall could actually be a prosperous time for us to, open up for seasons. And so we'll be starting in the summer, actually gearing up and putting out content for organizations to hopefully get the word out, get the word out that, we're coming back, hopefully new and improved. But I think there's always an opportunity to collaborate with GPAC, whether it's, your local organization has something you just want to put out there, because GPAC, I know, does cover 11 counties, that we're always willing to make sure to get the word out. So it's kind of a yes question. There's no definite, but we are always working with organizations to help with their communication processes.
Great, thank you. I have another question here from Todd Watkins. Has GPAC seen any particularly useful local or state level policy proposals or initiatives? In other words, are there things we collectively can be advocating for from our policymakers?
Yeah, I know that it's been really tricky because unfortunately in PA, it's been a little like mismatch of funding. But one of the biggest things that has been happening, at least that I have heard about through our communications at GPAC, was the Save Our Stage that has been working with local government and federal government to make sure that stages are being preserved, kept up, because venues are also being hit the most. But really, it's kind of our hands kind of tied, unfortunately, with government distributing funds, but kind of going back to the social compact, it's a little bit again of how can we all get on a united front, because it's like that mentality, there's more of us than them. And so what can we do collectively to put our thoughts and I don't want to say demands, but demands together as a collective unit. And so this is kind of with the social compact, is getting all the organizations to kind of sign off on it. So that way we can also put in Pittsburgh, but also with the state and federal and local government to show that, it's not just the one dance studio that needs money, but it's really these 300 plus organizations that need something. I wish I had a more specific policy, but I definitely would look into Save Our Stages. We've been talking about that a lot with the venues working group.
You want to speak about your venues working group that you have?
Yeah. So I've been lucky enough to kind of help facilitate and coordinate these working groups. So we have a museums working group, we have a performing arts organizations without venues, and then we have a performing arts organization with venues, and then arts education working group. So specifically with the venues group, we have been talking a lot, again, Save Our Stages, but really talking about what are the standards of reopening? What are the standards of allowing audiences to see that we're safe? Again, it's kind of come up with the ventilation systems, cleaning. It's been a journey, and I'm not trying to be pessimistic, but it's been a tough one because, for example, like the caps on capacity, a lot of small organizations, even big ones, if it's 50% or 25 people or et cetera, it really does create a limit on our venues. And so it was really nice to get that bump up, I believe in November, but then again, as we saw December to now, again, that like closing off. So it's been difficult with especially the venues group, because they do have the opportunity to host things, but it's the limits on capacity that's been the hardest problem. And so even if we're being cleanly and safe, the government is really the end all be all, say, hey, you guys are doing all the great things, but you can only have 25 people in your space. And then that leads to funding not being sufficient enough. And then program, it's kind of like this weird cycle where we are depending on the government to give us the okay. As you saw in the survey, a lot of people are just when it's legally acceptable to come back. So it's been positive for a lot of people to come in spaces. We've had guests, people talk about what they've been doing. For example, radical hospitality, where people are coming to see shows digitally, but do you give money back? Do you keep money back? It's all these kind of questions and conversations about what is morally acceptable in this time. So it's been a little bit more in the deeper thinking compared to action items, but it's been a good think tank. But it has been difficult because we are so reliant on what the government has to say and just the policies they're putting in place. I don't know if that answers your question either, but I do recommend we're actually going to be at the end of this month thinking about, you know, reimagining what these working groups are going to be as the vaccine is coming out, and really catering towards the people who are continuing it with us. But I would recommend spaces for people to come together just like this, because if it's not a time for people to just talk, it's people getting some ideas from each other, because, you know, as I said in the beginning, without collaboration, you're just on your own, which can be really hard, especially if you don't have the resources in place.
Any other questions?
Yes, so the questions are coming in now. I have one from Lori. Thoughts and or observations on impact of school outreach efforts and considerations going forward?
Yeah, so in our arts education group, I don't know if anyone knows Yael Silk from the Arts Education Collaborative, but she's been a great powerhouse and fierce individual in kind of setting the standards and just the conversations about schools and arts education. And so it has been difficult because we're kind of seeing organizations, and again, unfortunately, it is a survival of the fittest mindset, but we're having arts education groups who are focusing more on the business and financials compared to the actual, you know, children, arts, education, and et cetera. So it's been a kind of a interesting balance of what are the priorities in arts education. In terms of Pittsburgh schools, it's really hard to, because as we all know, just lack of resources, internet access. But one thing that we were thinking about doing in the future, and should just kind of be a staple moving forward, is you know, just arts organizations being spaces where they can host, you know, Wi-Fi or be little mini libraries, community spaces. Yeah, it's the one thing that has been difficult in all the working groups is we all need to survive, but we need to make sure that we are taking part of the people who are invested and involved with us, because if we forget about them in the process of getting money or whatever, they might lose out. It's been very difficult because a lot of venues aren't necessarily arts education specific. So it's been that kind of hard balance of performing arts organizations without venues trying to do arts education work, but not having the space or the access because, you know, coming into people's homes, etc. So it's been a challenge, but one of the things that we're really looking towards is, again, using our spaces that aren't being utilized right now, and what can we do with them? Can they be places for kids to come who maybe don't have good, you know, home lives, or they can be spaces for people to have public Wi-Fi, like a library. I think a lot of venues are thinking about what can we do in the community and for community spaces.
Thank you. And I have one more from Sheila here. Has there been discussion of independent contractors such as production tech, graphic designers, costumers, etc.?
Can you repeat that one? Just like conversations or?
Sure. So actually, Sheila, if you want to unmute and explain, you're welcome to, or I can read it again.
Sure. Just wondering if there has been any conversation about supporting the independent contractors who support the venues and in the other spaces, at least in the Pittsburgh area. I know that a significant number of independent contractors here in the Lehigh Valley have been devastated, as you know, that is their livelihood and it's a gig economy. So I'm just wondering if there's been conversation around that with the Save Our Spaces. Have the independent contractors been included in that conversation?
That's a good one. So in our specific working groups, no, but there have been people kind of advocating for them, because again, these contracts that venues do have with contractors, outsiders. Yeah, I wish I could say yes, but again, it's really, I'm not trying to give an excuse or justification, but I have personally seen that it's the venues or arts organizations, again, thinking about survival of the fittest mindset first before kind of everything else. And this is, you know, I'm glad you bring this up because, again, it's another group that is not being heard. And so I don't know if anyone has any, again, I also am taking feedback. I'm learning in this space. So if there's anything that, you know, in terms of that question specifically, is who can we contact, or is there a union? Is there a coalition? Just to kind of get them in the space, because I think a lot of the leaders are just thinking about how can they just make their venue, you know, keep going into 2021, 2022.
There will be some venues that are by contract obligated to do unions, union contract workers, but many venues are not. I would say, though, that it would behoove a greater mindset of, you know, it's great if you have the venues open, but if you don't have the expertise to run the lights, that's a moot point. So I would encourage you to take that consideration back to the conversation, just because this is a vital workforce that helps keep the lights on, literally.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And that's, I think, hopefully in this, which I'm glad you told me this, at the end of this month, kind of thinking about what can we do again to really spark the working groups in a more positive direction is, again, I personally think is how do we get people in that space to talk about these things. And so I wish I had a better answer.
Anyone else have a question for Andre? Well, I want to thank you very much for visiting us here in the Lehigh Valley.
Yeah, and I know Elise has that presentation, so feel free to share it with anyone. And if you want to talk about a little bit more of like the data, because I know that was a little bit more broad, feel free to reach out. I know my email is out there. Anyone can contact me at any time. But yeah, I appreciate having to come here. And also, I know things are, you know, looking a little grim, but also the vaccine coming out. But I think what is really, really important is that, again, that 94% of people want to come back. And so I know getting to that point is the kind of the long haul journey, but at least knowing that our audiences still are committed to us and actually trust us more than some people, I personally think is a positive. And so just knowing that your stakeholders are invested in you, and just hopefully we do come together, because again, with people not being heard, financial burdens, just people being scared, is a really good opportunity for us to come together and really demand, like, what do we need moving forward? Because if we are in the silos, unfortunately, people may not hear us.
Again, thank you very much. To all of my attendees, thank you for joining us. We'll be sending out an evaluation form for you to fill out. And also one of the questions will, any suggestions you might have for future gatherings. So thank you, Andre, and thanks to all of you for being here. Have a great evening.
Thanks, Randall, for putting this together, and for Andre for your information.
Yeah, and if you guys have any comments, suggestions, evaluations for me, I'll take it. I'm also learning with all of you.
Right.
We'll share the evaluations with you.
Yes.
Thanks for your time, Randall. Thanks for putting this together. Elise, thanks for shepherding us all through.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Bye.